can we prevent injuries? It's a good question. I would advise caution with the use of the word prevention. If you start talking about injury prevention within the sports and exercise medicine community, you'll get a lot of flack for it. So the better term to use is injury reduction. And we're going to look at a little bit of injury reduction strategies, what they mean, what they look like, are they effective, okay? But let's revisit two terms we talked about in the last section, nature of injury, so traumatic and overuse, okay? So can we prevent traumatic injuries? Probably not. They probably just happen. They probably are gonna happen. Obviously, we can mitigate things like fatigue and rehydration and fueling, but unfortunately, there's a certain risk that involves being an elite dancer or a dancer at any level for that matter. So sometimes these traumatic injuries, the fractures and the twists and the turns, they sometimes just happen, unfortunately. So we can't really prevent them. What about overuse injuries? And just as a reminder, they're the ones that occur with training load error, so doing too much too soon or doing more than we're physically able to do. I think we can look to reduce them. As I said, we probably can't prevent them, but we can reduce them. And what I mean by reduction is I don't just mean reducing the frequency, I mean reducing the severity as well. So whilst we might continue to get the same number of injuries, they're not as serious, they're not as bad. I have a very simple pyramid of injury reduction that I like to use, and we're going to talk through each one of these in turn, and it consists of load management, which I'll explain the theory of load and what it means and how to manage it, culture, very, very important, physical preparation, and ballet technique, okay? And these are all equally important. One is not more important than the other, in my opinion. You need to have all of these facets to have a good chance of reducing your injuries within the performing arts. So let's start. This is a very, very important concept, in my opinion, if we're even going to begin to look at injury reduction strategies in the performing arts. Load management. First of all, what is load? What is training load? Well, the best analogy that I can give you is the bucket analogy. And so the bucket is the dancer's physical capacity. So that's the amount of work that they can tolerate physically at any given time. And the water that you put in that bucket is all the stuff that you're asking them to do. So things like class, things like rehearsals, things like full runs, and things like performances. And if that bucket overflows, we've got a significant chance of getting injured. So that means is if we're asking our dancers to do more than they physically can do, we're on the road to an injury, okay? It's not a guarantee, but your risk of injury increases significantly. So we have two options here. We either put less water in the bucket so it doesn't overflow. So we don't do performances anymore, we do less class, we do less rehearsals. It works, but it's not a good option. Or we get a bigger bucket, okay? And what I mean by getting a bigger bucket is we get stronger. We build our physical capacity to accommodate the workload that we're being asked to do. So that is what training load is. And when we get this wrong, when we get this balance wrong, when we get our dancers to do too much too soon, or we make that bucket overflow, that's a training load error. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what training load does in terms of injury. Well, we want to make sure that we don't have big spikes and troughs in our training loads, okay? And as we can see here, we've got training load in terms of the bars, okay, and the weeks along the bottom. And if we have a big spike in training load, there is a risk for up to 4 weeks of getting injured, okay? And spikes can be relative, okay? And this could be caused by illness, exams, return from holiday. So a big problem we have at the moment, it's January 2021, is our dancers have been off for 3 weeks, okay? And our dancers have done very little for 3 weeks, a well-deserved holiday, and, sorry, wrong slide, and that's resulted in them having a big decrease in training load. So we've got to be very careful what we do with them over the next couple of weeks, not to spike it. So as we can see, in week 9, there's an injury, okay? So what's happened? Well, the big issue is not actually week 5, where we had what appears to be a big spike. The big issue here is week 4, when we've done very little. okay? And sometimes not doing very much at all is as bad as doing too much, okay? And we'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. So training load and having a very consistent, moderate training load can be protected. So training loads have the potential to protect from injury or actually increase the risk of injury. And with the increase of injury also becomes the increased risk of illness, okay? So both significantly low training loads and significantly high training loads will increase the likelihood of injury. The sweet spot is having a very consistent moderate to high level of injury. And what this graph shows is, as we move to a moderate to high level of injury, there's only a 2% chance of injury. But if we have a very high injury workload, it increases, but also if we have a very low injury workload, it increases. So in sum, looking at load management, we need to monitor training loads and try to avoid peaks and troughs. So we need to be very conscious on a week-to-week basis to gradually build up to a very consistent moderate to high training load for our dancers, okay? And try to avoid, where able, big peaks and troughs. So, next one, using physical preparation to reduce injury. It's very well established that class is not demanding enough, or I should say class alone is not demanding enough to prepare dancers for the rigors of performance. Doing an hour and 15 class does not prepare you for 56 performances over 12 weeks of the Nutcracker, okay? We can increase physical capacity through physical preparation, also known as strength and conditioning, or S&C. It's really important to understand that the goal of S&C is to supplement the technical ability that the dancers already have by improving their physical capabilities. So think of physical preparation as simply increasing the bucket. The last slide, training load, was reducing or being a bit more cautious about what we put in the bucket. If we do that, and in conjunction with physical preparation, we're getting a bigger bucket to accommodate everything that's been thrown at our dancers. We know from the research that strength training in elite ballet and modern dancers will increase your vertical jump height, will increase subjective dance performance measures, which is very, very important. It will decrease injury, which as a physiotherapist is really good, and that's what we're talking about, but it will also not cause any anthropometric changes to the dancer's body. What that means is the dancers will not, if done correctly, the dancers will not get bulky, they will not get less flexible. These are all the things that dancers understandably worry about. So this is the next part of the pyramid, physical preparation. So in sum, we need to increase the physical capacity of dancers to meet the demands that have been placed upon them. The next part of the pyramid is culture. So what is culture and why is it important? Well, one of my favorite definitions of what culture is the true evidence of culture is how people behave when no one is watching. So it's what are you doing? What is the environment of your workplace? What's the environment of your company? What's the environment of your dance troupe? Okay. And there's a big problem, I must admit, in the performing arts sector as a whole. And it's something that needs improving. So a few of the things and hallmarks that we have at Scottish Ballet is we do not punish our dancers if they're injured. They do not lose casting. It's not their fault. We create a safe environment for them to be injured in order to them to report injuries and then to seek the appropriate treatment. With that, it also relies on the dancers. There is no glory in dancing with injuries. I actually think it's unprofessional to dance with an injury. You're putting other people, the performance, your partner at risk. It's also very important to take your rehab and your strength and conditioning seriously. We need to adopt a performance mindset, okay? And it's very, very important that we create a culture where the early reporting of injury is encouraged. When someone reports an injury to me and my team early on, the earlier they do it, the easier it is to manage, okay? So this is the last part of the, or second to last part of the pyramid. Dancers and the support staff, this is teachers, choreographers, everybody, need to consistently demonstrate a strong and positive culture. We can do all the fancy screening, we can do all the fancy strength and conditioning work, but if we don't have the right culture, our injuries will continue to be an issue. It's very, very, very important, often overlooked. The final part of the pyramid is ballet technique. varying degree within the performing arts. There's varying degrees of technique codification. Okay, we've got something like ballet where it's very strict and codified to far more modern and contemporary art forms that are a bit more expressive. Okay, and some technical requirements, and I'm particularly looking at ballet here, may predispose individuals to injury. So some of the movements that we ask people to do, in professional ballet, physiologically they're quite challenging and do predispose people to injury. So very often maladaptive technique coupled with poor physical capacity, so someone not being weak, and poor load management will heighten your injury risks. So we have a poor technique, we're not very strong, and we're doing too much. This is a recipe for heightened injury risk. So that's why technique is very important. I have to admit, and Wendy will attest to this as well, there's further research on technique and technique refinement in relation to injury is required. But in some, you could say that maladaptive technique plays a significant role in injury and therefore must be addressed. And this is how all this fits together: load management, ballet technique, culture, physical preparation. That's the theory behind injury reduction within the performing arts. We need to get each and every one of those addressed by the correct people in order to try and reduce injury.